over Radka. Now it's that time of the day to have a look at some of the stories that are making the headlines in the media across the world. And we're going to begin with the Mail online, where else, who accused the EU Council President Donald Tusk of twisting the knife, they say, again, into Britain's bid to leave Europe after he allegedly told the UK Prime Minister Theresa May that the UK Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn's new plan for Brexit, they say, could be a way out of the current impasse. We'll be discussing that in a moment. Now, the Times leads with a warning from the Bank of England that the economy would grow this year at its slowest rate since the financial crash a decade ago. The bank slashed its growth forecast for the UK and cautioned that there was a 1 in 4 chance of recession by the summer. Meanwhile, the Financial Times says a secret group, well, not so secret anymore, at the heart of the UK government is drawing up plans to kickstart the British economy in the event of a No Deal Brexit, with options ranging from cutting tariffs and cutting taxes as well. On the front page of The Guardian, we're moving away from Brexit and its impact. The social media giant Instagram has announced that it will ban all graphic self-harm images as part of a series of changes made in response to the death of the British teenager Molly Russell. And finally, the old saying, drink a beer before wine and you'll feel fine, has found itself on some pretty shaky ground with academics over at Cambridge University. They've been doing a little bit of research and they found that there is no statistical difference in the discomfort ratings people gave their hangovers while consuming wine and beer in any particular order. You'll throw up, or at least 5% of us will throw up if we have it one way or the other, apparently. But more on that in a moment. Let's bring in Oliver Cornock, who's the editor-in-chief of the Oxford Business Group. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Let's start, shall we, with these comments in the Mail. These comments that Donald Tusk said that he would back the Corbyn plan and that it could be a way out of the current impasse. Now, just remind our viewers around the world what the Labour plan, the opposition plan, would be to Brexit.
Well, the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn, who leads the Labour Party here in the UK, has until recently had a very opaque at best position on Brexit. Let's be very honest here. And the current suggestion from Jeremy Corbyn would be that he could work with something that had the customs union and greater alignment with the single market. These are two big red lines for the Brexiteers, very important to Theresa May's Conservative Party, and notably, Victoria, we must also point out, red lines to an awful lot of Jeremy Corbyn's support base. So it's not quite as clean-cut as this sounds. Understandably, from the EU side, Donald Tusk is holding on to that because, of course, from their perspective, that is exactly what the sort of Brexit deal they would quite like. Very close alignment. You know, it's still part of the customs union, still part of the single market, etc., etc. But, of course, you could argue that isn't Brexit after all.
Do you think Number 10 would entertain it, particularly after, you know, those comments of Donald Tusk on Twitter, that there's a special place in hell, he said, for those who pushed for Brexit? I mean, do you think they're likely to listen to the likes of Donald Tusk and Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I don't think they are. And I also think, whatever your position on Brexit, Victoria, those sorts of comments from Europe, from leaders in Europe, and the headlines they generate just make the British person here look around and think, well, if that's the attitude, I'm not really sure. I'm bored sick of this anyway. And if this is the attitude, it's not very helpful. I just can't help feeling this might have hardened positions against any form of rapprochement. We heard some vox pops on a news item a few minutes ago about people saying, oh, well, actually, no deal's better than this. And this isn't good news for anyone.
No, it doesn't appear to be. And I guess, you know, the hard task for those sitting in the Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of England as to what all of this might mean for the future of the British economy. The Bank of England Governor Mark Carney was talking yesterday, this was the comments on the front page of the Times today, about what all of this Brexit scenario planning might mean for growth here. And he says the weakest growth in a decade. This is predicting. And his central scenario, let's not forget, is a smooth Brexit, not a sort of a crashing out, as some people would like to call it.
Yeah, an orderly Brexit.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think this is alarming, and it's against a backdrop, Victoria, of course, of negative stories from around the world, whether that be on the back of the China-US trade debacle, Australia's figures, you know, the Australian dollar's plummeted, turmoil there on lower growth. The US economy teetering a little bit, and let's look at the Eurozone, huge problems there. So not only is this Brexit-generated negativity, this is also a more global trend. And we have seen growth. Remember, we've lived in the legacy of the 2009 financial crisis for a very long time now. But there has been consecutive quarters of growth. Growth is slowing, and that is a cycle. We can't get away from that cycle. This could be a perfect storm, though, for the UK, as we're hearing in this story.
Yes, I'm glad that you put this kind of weaker growth story in the context of slower global growth. But I do wonder whether some of these forecasting is just sort of pie in the sky. It's all quite academic at this stage because no one has any idea what's going to happen in 5 weeks' time. Absolutely.
And interestingly, when Theresa May's initial deal was voted down so dramatically in the House of Commons, actually, markets didn't really react that strongly. Sterling didn't suddenly bottom out. One can't help thinking that markets have factored this sort of turmoil in a little bit more than they might have done.
Yeah, I think we're kind of stuck at that sort of 131 against the dollar, aren't we? Despite what happens.
For the moment, anyway.
For the moment. Let's talk about what's on the front page of the Financial Times and these plans that have been hatched in secret, they say, for what they call Project After. This is what Whitehall is working on. What to do if there is a no deal Brexit? What are the ideas that are being sort of bandied about? Do we know?
Well, this is the sort of understandable response from planners. Interestingly, in the hands of Mark Sedwill, the Cabinet Secretary, so given quite an important person to look after this. We do also have Project Yellowhammer, which is if there's any disasters that happen with that. So that's kind of the bad option. But this
it sounds a lot worse than Project After, doesn't
exactly.
it? Yellowhammer.
Project After is rather more moderate. It is about the sort of stimulus, the levers that the government, banks, financial institutions could use to stimulate growth. The trouble is, when I look at this, Victoria, I sort of think for the last 10 years we've been using an awful lot of those already.
Yes, exactly.
You suddenly start increasing government spending again. You start putting in supply and demand side improvements. Will that lead to inflationary pressure? All of these things are big question marks. But of course, all of us who are involved with investment, we're very pleased to know that this is being talked about and has been being talked about in secret since last summer. Of course, no longer a secret. No longer a secret,
as it splashed all over the front page of the Financial Times. Let's talk about the front page of The Guardian. And this story that my colleague Angus Crawford has highlighted, Instagram and its duty of care, really, to users around the world. And the head of Instagram, for the very first time, sort of announcing a mea culpa to some extent, saying that it's going to ban all graphic images of self-harm on the site. Is that enough?
It's difficult to know what is enough, isn't it? We must remember that this has resulted in arguably the death of a 14-year-old girl who took her own life. But when we step back, the power of the social media companies, Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, all of these have a responsibility, and we're seeing an increasing amount of government guidelines for our children, how much time they should be spending on these things. The psychological impact, whilst children are incredibly safer than they may have ever been, they're not as safe in terms of their psychological welfare because of the time they're spending on these things. So there are huge pluses. We know all the benefits from social media, increasing networking, access for information. But of course, we're hearing increasing and incremental negative stories, whether that be the harvesting of data to images. And of course, there are grey lines, aren't there? There are, of course, some absolute no-goes, indecent images of children, pornography. And then there are ones that are, what about the body beautiful, the encouragement of anorexia, bulimia, all of these awful psychological illnesses that we hear about. We're talking about mental health so much more now. This is just one part of that. So I think, again, this is just one little chink in a much broader social ill.
Yes, do keep your comments coming in on Twitter. It's BBC The Briefing if you want to talk to us about this. We've had one from Mark Marketon saying there's an element of tug of war going on for cyberspace. Governments want more control, censorship, and they're going to jump on any cause which facilitates that. But tech companies want growth and they want to keep their users happy. Just a very quick one, our last story. This is in lots of the papers today. Beer before wine will make you feel fine. Wine before beer makes you feel queer. Are you a wine or a beer man, or neither?
Wine, if I had to choose, but it shouldn't really be a surprise. I suppose this plays to the adage, all in moderation, doesn't it?
It certainly does. So it doesn't matter what way round you manage to have 4 large glasses of wine and 2.5 pints. 5% of people are going to throw it all up anyway. I'm not surprised because it's well over your weekly amount of booze. So there you go. Do keep your comments coming in on the programme. It's BBC The Briefing. Stay with us here on BBC News. A lot more to come.